Today I'm going to comment on an article about expats from the United States giving up their citizenship and share some secrets of Americans living overseas. There's an article on a website called expats.cz, this is from the Czech Republic, that asks, have you ever considered giving up your American citizenship? And it talks about how the need to file taxes in both the US and an American's adopted country is the main reason that expats give for considering ditching their US passports. I'm going to share this article with you because I think there's a lot of interesting points in there that are worth commenting on to set the record straight and to add clarity to things that a lot of people who want to live overseas are thinking about. If it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consultancy that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, diversify and protect their assets, get multiple citizenships, basically make sure they're in control of their life and their business in a place where there's lots of competitive countries in the world that would love to have your business. And I'm also the host of the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. So expats.cz, the article says most foreign nationals living abroad don't have to pay taxes in their home country. Americans are an exception. They're required to file income tax every year regardless of where they reside. And so let me just clarify that first. Okay. If you are a US citizen, if you're a US person, and there's 4 different ways you can be a US person, including also having a green card. And so if you have a green card, by the way, and you could be a citizen and you want to live overseas, your life will probably be a lot easier just being a citizen, but that's an aside. You can still dramatically reduce your taxes, in some cases to zero, depending on whether you're an employee, an entrepreneur, an investor. In some cases, you can reduce it to zero. In some cases, you can reduce it substantially into the single digits or the low double digits. In some cases, you can't reduce it at all, depending on how you make your money. But there are plenty of ways for Americans to reduce their taxes. Don't believe that, like, hey, I have to file and pay. By the way, if you're living in a country like the Czech Republic, you've got things like treaties, you've got foreign tax credits, you've got all kinds of things you can use to reduce it if you're paying taxes somewhere else in many cases. So don't think that, like, I'm an American, I can't move, I might as well not go anywhere. That's not the case. You can still achieve dramatic savings. They're also, the article continues, required to file in the country where they reside as well. And that is true, which is why we've talked about for folks who forget not wanting to pay. For many people, the idea of a better lifestyle, experiencing different countries, and less bureaucracy. The idea of, hey, I'm going to spend 4 months here, 4 months there, 4 months here. We call it a trifecta lifestyle, 3 homes, 4 months each. You could be nomadic. The cool thing that Americans have in their favor is the US government is less difficult in terms of, if you want to be nomadic, hey, that's cool with us, just don't come back very often. Whereas a lot of other countries, they really want you to specify, like, hey, where are you signing up to pay tax next to get out of our tax net? Not giving you tax advice, not blanket advice. Everyone's situation is different, but the US, the advantage is if you just wanted to live in a bunch of different countries because you're a remote worker or you have a business that can be run from anywhere, you can do that. And then that will help you avoid the situation that expat magazines like this are often talking about, where it's like, hey, you live in a country with taxes also. Well, you don't have to. You could also go and live full-time in Dubai or any number of other tax-friendly countries, and you won't have to file there either. While American citizens abroad get an automatic extension in filing, and even can apply for a second extension, that often puts off the inevitable. They still have to file and pay taxes in both countries. Again, not necessarily in both countries if you don't live in a second country. And yes, you do get an extension if you are an expat. And of course, you get the normal extensions that every American does. But there's a way around dual taxation. A taxpayer can renounce his or her American citizenship. That is, of course, the most extreme way to get out of the US tax net. It's also the only way to entirely get out of the US tax net. There are strategies that you can use that are legal, that you can reduce your taxes, especially if you're an entrepreneur, down to as low as 0%. Now, even if you're paying 0%, you're going to have more restrictions on how you use the money in your business than if you weren't an American. So again, that's not really about renouncing to avoid taxes. That's about renouncing because maybe the paperwork is too complicated or because you want more access to your money. But yes, you can renounce your US citizenship, and that's the one way to totally get out of the tax net. Same thing with relinquishing a green card. Most countries, including the Czech Republic, though, require foreigners, even ones with residence permits, to have a valid passport. I'm not entirely sure that that's true, because I certainly know there are cases of people with permanent residence in Europe who simply could become stateless. And it's always an interesting question, like, you know, the US Embassy may not stop you from becoming stateless. And so how does that work, like where you're at? Maybe they can't get rid of you. Like, are they going to call the US and threaten to send you back? Like, it's always kind of an interesting conversation. But giving up American citizenship is only an option for people who have some form of dual citizenship, so they will still have one valid passport remaining. All the interesting points aside, being stateless is pretty unappealing, I think, to most people. And so having some kind of other citizenship is going to be important. Obviously, we talk about it here. You can do it in a matter of months with some kind of Caribbean citizenship by investment. If you're really going to be in Europe and you can afford a nearly $1 million price tag, Malta has a fast track program that takes about 18 months. There are other countries that have citizenship by investment you can claim if you have ancestry in Europe or anywhere else in the world. Latin America, even Africa now has some programs you can claim citizenship by descent, or you can simply live in Europe or live in anywhere in the world that offers citizenship and work towards that passport. So you can get second citizenship in a number of ways depending on your speed and what kind of passport you want. And once you have that citizenship, you can give up your US citizenship. Now, the U.S. State Department warns that giving up U.S. citizenship is not something to be done lightly, as it cannot be easily reversed. And that's correct. Generally speaking, once you renounce citizenship, you can't go back. There's no reinstatement. Some countries actually do have reinstatement, whether it's one time or I suppose there are some countries that seem to have just like a limited reinstatement. I don't know how many times they'd actually let you renounce and unrenounce. But yeah, in the U.S., you are one and done unless you can show like you were totally, it was involuntary, but they basically take steps to make sure that they know it's voluntary because they don't want people involuntarily giving up their citizenship. So once you are out of the U.S., you are out. According to a recent survey of American expats living in 121 countries, about 6% of expats are planning to renounce citizenship, and another 20% are seriously considering it. So about 1 in 4 Americans living overseas are seriously considering it. The numbers are anywhere from 8 to 10 million. That number is likely higher now with folks who have left seeking more personal freedom in the last couple of years. But 1 in 4 of maybe, let's call it expats classic, have said they're considering renouncing citizenship or are preparing to do it. Now, the numbers for citizenship renunciation have gone up in the United States over the years, even as the fees have also gone up. There are certainly people who I think aren't necessarily wealthy entrepreneurs, but they have jobs somewhere else, and it's hard for them to save up the money to renounce that they would like to renounce. And so the number of people who are considering this is growing. Most people ultimately won't do it. And if you'd like me to talk about more of the reasons why you shouldn't do it, then leave a comment below and I'll be happy to make that. But 1 in 4 folks are saying that they will probably or certainly renounce. Another 42% said they wouldn't rule it out. Okay, that's a little blasé. And then about 32%, a little less than a third, said they would never consider it. And so the question obviously is, if you are planning to go back to the US after you're an expat, then yeah, you're going to want to keep that citizenship and just suck up whatever you think the challenges are along the way. But if you're thinking of staying overseas forever, you might start to think, hey, like, what am I getting myself in bureaucracy? Why am I being rejected by banks? Why am I having difficulty getting a mortgage? Especially if you're living in one place, as these expats in Europe often are. If you're someone who's just like, hey, I live in a new country, I live in Switzerland, I live in the Czech Republic, I live in Ireland, like, yeah, you're probably going to have more difficulties as an American. And if you plan to get their citizenship, or if you already have another citizenship and you don't really want to go back to the US either to visit substantially or to live, then yeah, you can imagine why some people would be open to renouncing. Now, there was a survey taken by a tax firm that showed that 40% of people who wanted to renounce citizenship said that filing US taxes is too much of a burden. And that includes people who don't even make as much money. These are not necessarily millionaires and billionaires, but 40% of Americans who wanted to renounce citizenship said the taxes were too much of a burden. And no doubt, you're doing taxes in a new country if you're living there full time. And even if you're not, even if you're living in Dubai, even if you're living in like a country where they don't bother you for taxes, territorial tax, even if you're paying a lump sum, which is easy to pay, whatever, having to pay US taxes is still kind of a pain. So 40% found it to be a burden. And so the survey said, because the majority of the world's nations use a system of residence-based taxation, most US expats are required to pay taxes in their host country. Despite this, many also have to pay taxes to the US government on the same income. But again, that's not entirely accurate because you're often going to have offsets. So the issue of like, I'm going to have to pay twice doesn't really affect nearly as many people as you'd like to think. So the issue more is bureaucracy. So the idea that everyone's renouncing citizenship because they don't want to pay tax, maybe they're renouncing because it's just not worth it. Maybe they're renouncing because it's too much paperwork. They want to live their life. They want to enjoy. They don't want to be afraid that if they forget one bank account or they have a multi-currency account and they forget to put one of those account numbers on a form, that they're going to be in the news for like some guy getting a $2.4 million FBAR penalty. They don't want to be under constant scrutiny. I mean, maybe that's why. Maybe it's not really about the money. Maybe it's actually about just all the paperwork, the hassle, the thinking, the quality of life. the troubles living overseas because you're an American and you have the Scarlet Letter. The rest of the people gave reasons that were not related to finance. The second most popular reason for wanting to renounce was the political climate, with more disagreeing with the direction of the U.S. government, and another 10% saying they did not have strong ties to the U.S. Being married to a non-U.S. citizen was cited by 12% of people. So basically, we have people who are saying, I like to renounce because I just don't agree with the political climate. I don't know if I really agree with that. Just disagree with it somewhere else. I get that, like, if you really feel strongly about it and you just, like, to the point where I don't feel like I'm an American, that's something different than I don't agree with the current politicians. So I would encourage you to be careful with that. Disagree with the direction of the U.S. government, that can change. I don't say stay and fight, but if you can live and you can have a good quality of life and the issues, don't necessarily affect you, then I don't know if that's a reason to renounce either. And so the article just goes on and says 77% of expats don't think they should have to pay U.S. taxes while living abroad, and 40% of expats do not plan to return to the U.S. permanently. So if you're in that group that thinks, hey, if I live overseas, I won't return to the U.S. permanently, then I absolutely think that the idea of getting a second passport, at least so that you have the infrastructure ready to be able to make the decision at some point if the mood strikes, hey, I want to renounce my citizenship. By the way, this can apply to any country's citizenship. If you're leaving Canada or Australia and you don't like the direction that they're going and you can afford to get second citizenship somewhere, do that and have it ready. And if one day things go off the rails, you'll be able to make a decision and you won't be waiting 6 to 12 months or however long they choose to make it in the future to get your second passport. No doubt, the idea of having to pay taxes or at least file the taxes, even if you don't owe anything, which is often the case with a lot of people that we're talking to, it is kind of offensive. And I think people, again, it's like, is it that you don't want to pay, or is it that you're offended that, like, no one else in the world has this and you have to pay? So those are some issues that are being brought up by some expats in Europe. So what do we take away from that? Number one, you can be an American and dramatically reduce your taxes overseas, but yes, you have more of a paperwork burden than anybody else. You also have the benefit of being able to be a bit more flexible in your travel plans than other nationalities. You don't necessarily have to worry about dual taxation in many cases, especially if you're living the nomad capitalist lifestyle. I wouldn't really worry about overseas taxes and bureaucracy as much as people who have jobs in Europe. I also, what they mentioned is having trouble getting bank accounts and mortgages. If you're trying to get a bank account and mortgage in certain European countries, again, where you live, that may be more difficult. For the same reasons that I see, like, in the news the last 2 years, someone in Germany is trying to renounce and they can't get an appointment. Okay, why don't you just not renounce in Germany? There were embassies and consulates that were open throughout the entire pandemic, almost, where you could renounce. And so, like, if you're just, like, committed to keeping everything in one country where you live, that's not what we talk about here. You should definitely want to diversify. So, yeah, getting a mortgage in one country where you live, that could be a reason to be really frustrated. Americans have been rejected for mortgages in European countries, but if it's a bank account issue, you can bank anywhere in the world, including in Europe. And so I think a lot of the issues that they bring up here are easily fixed, especially if you have total location independence.